Grigori Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, Russia's greatest love machine, and Russia's most notorious man of mystery. Did you know that his reputation for licentiousness, basically meaning being sexually immoral and promiscuous, earned him the surname Rasputin, Russian for debauched one? So other than the mystery of how this guy became the Thanos of the Russian cinematic universe, in the sense that it apparently took a small team of Avengers an extraordinary amount of effort to kill him, he also somehow managed to become the Charlie Sheen of the RCU, parking his car in everybody's garage, despite how creepy he looks. I mean, just look at this guy. Jesus Christ! But thanks to him, we have this cool Boney M song, this Fortnite emote, and a video for today. Why wouldn't Rasputin die, despite being poisoned, shot repeatedly, and drowned? Let's see if we can figure it out. Sources in the description, and viewer discretion is advised for dark humor, disturbing content, poor pronunciation, and strong language. I'm not Coco Melon or Mr. Ballin.
Because at one point in the video, Bud mimicked Marty's voice by yelling, "Don't fucking shoot!"
Whoa! Okay, calm down, Mr. Pottymouth. And with that shocking revelation, let's get going. Grigori Rasputin was born a peasant in the small village of Pokrovsk in the Russian Empire. According to Britannica, he was born on January 22nd, 1869. And according to historian Douglas Smith, Rasputin's youth and early adulthood are a black hole about which we know almost nothing. Despite this though, people still made up stories about it because the Thanos of the RCU needed a dark backstory. Historians agree, however, that like most Siberian peasants, including his mother and father, Rasputin was not formally educated and remained illiterate well into his early adulthood, and local archival records suggest that he had somewhat of an unruly youth. According to History Today, who worded it so nicely, Rasputin grew up as a drunken illiterate narcissist who seems to have eagerly cherished a delusion that he was the most important being in the universe. However, there is no evidence of Rasputin being charged with stealing horses, blasphemy, or bearing false witness, all the major crimes that he was later accused of. Then in 1886, at the age of 18, Rasputin traveled to a place called Abelak and met a peasant girl named Praskovia Dubravina. After being peasants together for a few months, they decided to be peasants together forever, and they got married in February 1887, and they had 7 children together, only 3 of them surviving to adulthood. However, Rasputin didn't actually want to be a peasant forever, nor did he want to be with this peasant girl forever. So in 1897, Rasputin decided that his renewed interest in religion was way more important than his wife of 10 years and his children, and he just fucked off on a pilgrimage. He first went to Mount Athos in Greece, and then he went to Jerusalem. During this time, he allegedly earned a reputation for his incredible ability to heal the sick and to predict the future. And to the surprise of no one, he survived this pilgrimage through donations from other peasants, and not through his incredible powers. According to historian Douglas Smith again, his decision to abandon his family could have only been occasioned by some sort of emotional or spiritual crisis. Rasputin then wandered about until he finally found his way to the St. Nicholas Monastery at Verkhoturye, which is said to have transformed him greatly. There he met a bunch of starets, which are elders of an Eastern Orthodox or Eastern Catholic monastery, who function as venerated advisors and teachers. This group in particular was specifically known as a Makari, and it's said that he was profoundly humbled by this meeting. Rasputin then briefly returned to Pokrovsk as a changed man, looking disheveled and behaving differently. He became a vegetarian, he swore off alcohol, and prayed and sang much more fervently than he had in the past. He then spent the following years as a stranek, basically a holy wanderer or a pilgrim, leaving Pokrovsk for months and sometimes even years at a time to wander the country and visit a variety of holy sites. By the early 1900s, Rasputin had developed a small circle of followers who were mostly family members and other local peasants who prayed with him on Sundays and other holy days when he was in Pokrovsk. This group that he had built a makeshift chapel in Rasputin's dad's root cellar because Rasputin was still living with his father at the time, and this group would gather to hold secret prayer meetings there. Over time, the other villagers and the village priest got quite suspicious of these meetings, and it was rumored that female followers were ceremonially washing Rasputin before each meeting, that the group sang strange songs, and even that Rasputin had joined the Klist, a religious sect whose ecstatic rituals were rumored to include self-flagellation and sexual orgies. Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine. According to historian Joseph Furman, however, repeated investigations failed to establish that Rasputin was ever a member of the Klist sect, and rumors that he was a Klist appear to have been unfounded. Fair enough, but any press is good press, and word of Rasputin's activities and charisma began to spread. Then at some point during 1904 or 1905, Rasputin traveled to the city of Kazan, where he earned a reputation as a wise starets who could help people resolve their spiritual crisis and anxieties. He would go on to make a good impression on several local religious leaders. Among these were Archimandrite Andrei and Bishop Christanos, who gave Rasputin a letter of recommendation to Bishop Sergei, the rector of the theological seminary at the Alexander Nevsky Monastery, and arranged for him to travel to St. Petersburg. When Rasputin arrived in St. Petersburg, he was introduced to Archimandrite Theophan, the inspector of the theological seminary, who was well connected in the St. Petersburg community and later served as confessor to the imperial family. Now, Theophan was so impressed with Rasputin that he invited him to stay in his home, and he went on to become one of Rasputin's most essential friends in St. Petersburg. Theophan got him into many of the influential salons where the local aristocracy gathered for religious discussions. It was through these meetings that Rasputin attracted some of his early and influential followers, many of whom would actually later turn against him. So it's here where Rasputin had formed friendships with several members of the aristocracy, including the Black Princesses, Militsa and Anastasia of Montenegro, who married the cousins of Tsar Nicholas II, the last reigning emperor of Russia. And it's the Black Princesses who played a massive part in introducing Rasputin to the Tsar and his family in 1905. By the way, there is another Black Princess, and her name is Misty, and she gets a treat for every new subscriber she gets. So if you want to give Misty a treat, it's as easy as hitting the subscribe button. Hey, and if you are subscribed and want to give Misty a treat, just put a little cat emoji in the comment section. Moving on. When Rasputin and Nicholas met for the first time, Nicholas recorded the event in his diary, writing that he and his empress consort Alexandra had made the acquaintance of a man of God, Grigori from Tobolsk province. Rasputin then sent Nicholas a telegram asking to present him with an icon of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturiye. Tsar Nicholas then wrote to one of his ministers in October 1906, saying, quote, "A few days ago, I received a peasant from..." You mean present? Nah, he definitely said peasant. "I received a peasant from the Tobolsk district, Grigori Rasputin, who brought me an icon of Saint Simeon of Verkhoturiye. He made a remarkably strong impression both on Her Majesty and on myself, so that instead of 5 minutes, our conversation went on for more than an hour." End quote. So clearly, Nicholas and Alexandra loved Rasputin. The couple had consulted with spiritual advisors in the past, but Rasputin surpassed their expectations with his ability to discern their inner hopes and tell them what they wanted to hear. He then met with Nicholas and Alexandra a few more times after this, and they also introduced him to their only son, Alexei Nikolaevich. Now, Alexei suffered from something called hemophilia, a rare disorder in which blood doesn't properly clot. And during these meetings, when Rasputin would pray for the family, Alexandra believed that Rasputin had eased Alexei's pain and stopped his bleeding. Now, historians have debated over when exactly Rasputin first prayed for Alexei, but it's either November 1905 or October 1906. Now, this goes without saying, but historians have also debated over how legit Rasputin's healing powers actually were. However, some people do believe that he had the power to heal the sick. Tsar Nicholas's sister, Grand Duchess Olga, later reported that Rasputin healed Alexei by kneeling at the foot of his bed and praying. It's also thought that the calming atmosphere that Rasputin brought to the palace may have also assisted Alexei's recovery. However, even back in 1906 already, Rasputin had haters, because one of Alexandra's ladies-in-waiting named Baroness Sophie thought that Rasputin actually gave Alexei some peasant folk medicine, which was used in Siberian villages to treat internal bleeding in horses. Well, whatever it was that he actually did seemed to the people there like it worked. So he was again summoned by Alexandra to pray for Alexei when he had an internal hemorrhage in the spring of 1907. Rasputin came and prayed, and Alexei recovered the next morning. One of Alexandra's friends named Anna then became convinced that Rasputin had miraculous powers and became one of his most influential advocates. So things right now are looking pretty good for Thanos. People like him, he's out there right now collecting all of the Infinity Stones, and then about 5 years later, during the summer of 1912, Alexei developed another hemorrhage in his thigh and groin after a jolting carriage ride near the imperial hunting grounds at Spala, which caused a large hematoma. The best way to describe the scene is to quote Axl Rose. Alexei was knocking on heaven's door. He looked like he was about to die. He was in severe pain and delirious with a fever. So in desperation, Alexandra asked Anna to send Rasputin, who was in Siberia, a telegram asking him to pray for Alexei. Rasputin wrote back quickly, telling Alexandra, quote, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." To the surprise of probably no one, the next morning Alexei was, still dying. But Alexandra was encouraged by the message and trusted Rasputin that Alexei would not die. Amazingly, his bleeding stopped the following day. Now I say amazingly because almost everyone back then was so amazed by this. Even a doctor named Fedorov, one of the physicians who attended to Alexei, admitted that, quote, "The recovery was wholly inexplicable from a medical point of view." Later on, Dr. Fedorov admitted that Alexandra could not be blamed for seeing Rasputin as a miracle man. Quote, "Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that?" End quote. Fair enough. Now some historians have called Alexei's recovery, quote, "one of the most mysterious episodes of the whole Rasputin legend," because the cause of his recovery is unclear. But for some reason, some historians are ignoring the memoirs of Pierre Gilliard, Alexei's French language tutor, who speculated back then already that Rasputin controlled Alexei's bleeding by disallowing the administration of aspirin, which was widely used back then, but was unknown as an anti-clotting agent until the 1950s. So why are we ignoring this guy then? Is that because it doesn't fit the narrative that Rasputin had superpowers? Probably, but at the time, medical knowledge was limited. Aspirin back then was considered a cure-all remedy, but it also had the unknown side effect of thinning the blood, which would have made Alexei's hemophilia even worse. So by Rasputin offering this irresponsible advice of not letting the doctors bother Alexei too much, and thereby stopping them from administering aspirin, Rasputin may have improved Alexei's condition under what seemed to be miraculous circumstances. However, most likely unintentionally. Well, either way, that's completely fucking irrelevant because the imperial family's belief in Rasputin's healing powers brought him considerable status and power at court. Tsar Nicholas then appointed Rasputin his lampadnik, which is a lamplighter, which basically his job was to keep lamps lit in the palace that were nearby religious icons. But this did give him regular access to the palace as well as to the imperial family. Rasputin then presented himself to the imperial court as a holy man, but his behavior away from court was drastically different. Rasputin's drunkenness and affairs with women of all social backgrounds, from prostitutes all the way to society ladies, shocked and offended the public. And not only that, but Rasputin also appeared to bask in his fame by showing off these nice shirts that were embroidered for him by the Empress and inviting her friends and servants to his home in Pokrovsky. The media then began spreading stories about Rasputin, accusing him of rape, religious heresy, exerting undue political influence over Tsar Nicholas, and having an affair with Alexandra. Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, the Eastern Orthodox Church then denounced him as a heretic, and the Bishop of Tobolsk launched an inquest into his activities, accusing him of spreading false Christ-like doctrines. Even Tsar Nicholas's secret police launched an investigation into Rasputin, but they just could not convince Nicholas that Rasputin was maybe a bad guy, and he needed to exile him from St. Petersburg. Well, to be fair, I guess, he did believe that Rasputin healed his son, and he needed someone to keep his lamps lit. However, despite being investigated by all of these different organizations, Rasputin didn't really seem to give a shit and just kept doing his thing. Outside of the royal court, Rasputin preached that physical contact between him and others purified them, and he kept engaging in drunken extramarital affairs with a wide range of women. Then at some point, a woman named Kionia, one of Rasputin's early supporters, accused him of raping her. Kionia then even went to Archimandrite Theophan for help. Remember him? He was a character in this video at some point, and Theophan, who was so impressed with Rasputin at one point, was now convinced that he was a danger to the monarchy. The Prime Minister then sent Nicholas a report on Rasputin's misdeeds, and finally, Nicholas told Rasputin to fuck off, but Alexandra, who loved Rasputin so much, had him returned within a matter of months. And Nicholas, not wanting to upset his wife or endanger his son, chose to ignore the allegations against Rasputin and allowed him to stay. However, rumors continued, saying that Rasputin had assaulted female followers and behaved inappropriately on visits with the imperial family, and particularly with Nicholas's teenage daughters, Olga and Tatiana. Now, this was less of a rumor and was more true, because Rasputin walked into their nursery while they were in their nightgowns. Instead of Nicholas telling him to fuck off again, he just forbid him from ever entering the nurseries again. Now, things start getting really bad around here, and shit starts falling apart for Thanos, because close to the First World War, during this period of time, feudalism was dissolved and a, quote, meddling government bureaucracy all contributed towards Russia's rapid economic decline. Many of the Russian people blamed Alexandra and Rasputin for this. One member of the Duma, a far-right politician named Vladimir Purishkevich, said that the Tsar's ministers had been turned into marionettes whose threads had been taken firmly in their hand by Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra, the evil genius of Russia, and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne and alien to the country and its people. Alexandra, by the way, was born as a German princess. Now people were starting to hate this guy and were against him. Then on July 12, 1914, a peasant woman named Kionia, not the same Kionia as before, tried to assassinate Rasputin by stabbing him in the stomach outside his home in Pokrovsky. Now you'd think that Rasputin was all like,
all that for a drop of blood?
Because he was fucking Rasputin, and as the story goes, he was almost impossible to kill. But no, he nearly died. The doctors weren't even sure if he would survive, but after surgery and some time in hospital, he recovered. Now, Kionia number 2 was a follower of an era monk named Sergei Trufanov, a guy who actually used to follow Rasputin, but then denounced him because of his sexual escapades and self-aggrandizement. Trufanov, or Iliador as he was referred to, was a radical conservative and anti-Semite, who had been part of a group of people who tried to separate the imperial family and Rasputin. When that failed, Iliador was banished from St. Petersburg and defrocked, which means his rights as a clergyman were removed. Kionia number 2 then claimed that she acted alone, but Rasputin and the police believed that that was bullshit and Iliador ordered the hit on him. Iliador then fled the country before he could be questioned, and Kionia number 2 was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Rasputin would then reach the pinnacle of his power at the Russian court after 1915. During World War I, Tsar Nicholas took personal command of his forces and went all the way to join his troops on the front line, leaving Alexandra in charge of Russia's internal affairs, while Rasputin served as her personal advisor. Rasputin's influence ranged from the appointment of church officials to the selection of cabinet ministers, and he even occasionally intervened in military matters, often to Russia's detriment. And although he was not known to support any political group in particular, Rasputin was still a strong opponent of anyone opposing the autocracy or himself. So Thanos here was slowly turning into the Mad Titan, or as people actually did refer to him at the time, Rasputin was slowly turning into the Mad Monk. As the war went on, rumors began to spread that Rasputin was a traitor that was now working with the Germans, and there was a story that Rasputin tried to undermine the war effort by starting a cholera epidemic in St. Petersburg with poisoned apples imported from Canada. Yeah man, people just hated this guy now, and this one guy in particular really wanted Rasputin gone. This guy was Prince Feliks Yusupov, a wealthy aristocrat who married into the imperial family by marrying Nicholas's niece Irina. Now, Prince Feliks lived a pretty aimless life of privilege, and Nicholas's eldest daughter, Grand Duchess Olga, worked as a nurse during World War I and criticized Prince Feliks' refusal to enlist, writing to her father, quote, "Felix is a downright civilian, dressed in all brown and virtually doing nothing. An utterly unpleasant impression he makes, a man idling in such times." End quote. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, plotting Rasputin's murder gave Prince Feliks an opportunity to reinvent himself as a patriot and a man of action, determined to protect the throne from a malignant influence. End quote. And maybe also possibly so that he could cement his legacy as some sort of Captain Russia. See, several other attempts had already been made to kill Rasputin and save Russia from further calamity, but none of these attempts were successful obviously, until Prince Feliks, fucking Captain Russia, assembled his team of Avengers. This group of extreme conservatives included Prince Feliks, Vladimir Purishkevich, and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, who who was Tsar Nicholas's cousin, and they formed a plan together to eliminate Rasputin and save the monarchy from further scandal. So Prince Feliks and his friends believed that Rasputin's removal would give Nicholas one last chance at restoring the reputation and prestige of the monarchy. With Rasputin gone, they hoped the Tsar would return from the military headquarters and once again govern St. Petersburg, but now taking the advice of his extended family, the nobility, and the Duma, the Russian legislative body, instead of listening to Alexandra or Rasputin. Now that we're in the endgame, we can finally get to the weird shit. The most widely known account of Rasputin's murder appears in Prince Feliks's memoirs, which were published in 1928. Prince Feliks said, quote, "The devil who was dying of poison, who had a bullet in his heart, must have been raised from the dead by the powers of evil. There was something appalling and monstrous in his diabolical refusal to die." Now, what in the hell is this man talking about? Well, according to Captain Russia, Rasputin was invited to his palace shortly after midnight and ushered into the basement. Feliks then offered Rasputin tea and cakes which had been laced with cyanide. After initially refusing to eat the cakes, Rasputin began to eat them, and to Feliks's surprise, appeared completely unaffected by the poison. Rasputin then apparently asked for some Madeira wine, which Feliks had also laced, but Rasputin drank 3 glasses and still showed no sign of distress. Then at around 2:30 a.m., Feliks excused himself to go upstairs where his fellow co-conspirators were waiting. He then went to Nicholas's cousin Dmitry Pavlovich and asked to borrow his revolver. He then returned to the basement and told Rasputin that he had better look at the crucifix and say a prayer.
Just look at the flowers, Lizzie.
Probably sounded more badass at the time, but reading it now sounds kinda cringe. Anyway, he was referring to the crucifix in the room, and then he shot Rasputin in the left side of his chest. Rasputin then just apparently tanked the damage and then ran. He just ran. He didn't grab no shoes or nothing, Jesus. He just ran for his life. And he ran all the way outside of the palace to the courtyard, but then he was hit with a second bullet in the spine. The Avengers then dragged him all the way back inside the palace and claimed to have beaten the shit out of him, and then they threw him back into the basement. Pretty soon after this, a policeman who heard the gunshot came over to the palace to ask everybody what's going on. However, the group just sent him away. Well, they are royalty, so I suppose in that case you can tell the police to fuck off. But then half an hour later, a second policeman came to the palace, but this time Vladimir Porushkovich let the cop in and told him that they shot Rasputin, but they asked the cop to not say anything. Now, since there are so many alternate versions of the story, I'm not really sure what happened here. But no one is, to be fair. But apparently the conspirators, the Avengers, then made one of their guys drive to Rasputin's apartment wearing Rasputin's coat and hat to make it look as though Rasputin had returned home that night. Now, I'm not quite sure why they would bother doing that if a cop already knows that you shot this guy, but whatever. Later, Prince Feliks then goes back down to the basement to make sure that Rasputin is dead. Before they threw him in there, they tied him up with ropes and shit, but when he went down there, suddenly Rasputin opens his eyes, which were green like a viper, and he jumps up and he attacks Captain Russia. Rasputin had somehow freed himself from these ropes, and Captain Russia then pushes him away and ran back upstairs into the palace. Rasputin then follows him all the way out into the courtyard, where Porushkovich shot Rasputin a third time. Rasputin then collapsed into a snowbank, and the Avengers decided this time they're going to wrap him in a blanket, and they're going to drive all the way to the Petrovsky Bridge and drop his body into the Little Nevka River. And that pretty much covers Captain Russia's account of how he beat Thanos. Well, after hearing about all of this, on Alexandra's order, a police investigation began, and traces of blood were discovered on the steps to the back door of Prince Feliks's palace. Prince Feliks then attempted to explain the blood away with a story about one of his favorite dogs being accidentally shot by Grand Duke Dmitry. However, Prince Feliks and Dmitry were arrested, or more specifically, they were placed under house arrest. Alexandra then refused to meet the two, but told them that they could explain themselves and what had happened in a letter to her. After that, she ordered that they both be shot immediately, but she was persuaded against that. Then, without a trial, Tsar Nicholas ordered the Grand Duke Dmitry, his cousin, to active service on the Persian front, and Porushkovich was sent to the Romanian front. Prince Feliks was sentenced to house arrest. He was then soon exiled from St. Petersburg and ended up living a nice long life in France, dying in 1967. But wait, there's more. According to how stuff works, Adding another layer of mystery to Rasputin's death, his body was found with his right arm outstretched, presumably to make the sign of the cross, suggesting that he was somehow still alive when he hit the water, and also managed to partially free himself. According to other sources, there were also scratch marks under the ice, and his nails were bent back, suggesting that he was trying to claw his way out from the icy river. Going back to how stuff works, quote, the autopsy report listed hypothermia from the freezing water as Rasputin's cause of death. Rasputin was then buried, and apparently later, again according to Trust Me Bro sources, Rasputin's body was then dug up by a detachment of soldiers who wanted to burn his body, and when they threw him onto the fire, his body appeared to sit up in the flames. Apparently, he was also shouting death threats at them. According to how stuff works again, a few months later, the Romanov dynasty collapsed with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. Then on July 16, 1918, Tsar Nicholas, Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children were brutally murdered by revolutionaries. After their death, a letter allegedly written by Rasputin that his secretary found predicted and prophesied that the royal family would all die if Rasputin died at the hands of anyone within the royal family. This letter said, quote, if it was one of your relations who have wrought my death, then no one in the family, none of your relations will remain alive for more than 2 years, end quote. Well, Prince Feliks and Princess Irina did. They lived until 1967. Also, this letter was found after Alexandra died, so it could have been written by anybody. Well, anyway, let's not jump ahead. So now we have the strange case of Rasputin laid out in front of us. The question being, how much of this is true? Did it really take this much to kill Rasputin? Did he, in fact, have some sort of supernatural powers that allowed him to keep tanking damage? Well, firstly, we know that he almost died from a single stab wound to the stomach, so perhaps in this case where he fought Captain Russia, he had a little more adrenaline. Speaking of Captain Russia, he published several accounts of the night and the events surrounding the murder. However, as you can understand, most historians doubt it played out the way he suggests. Most people accept that he was probably lying or at best embellishing. Secondly, assuming that Captain Russia did try to poison Rasputin, some people have theorized that it may have been old, oxidated, or expired poison. Rasputin's daughter, however, also said that her father abstained from sweet food and would not have eaten the supposedly poisoned cakes. Yeah, like he supposedly abstained from alcohol. However, they poisoned the wine that he drank as well, and he drank 3 glasses of the shit. So either this is an embellishment from Prince Feliks, or the poison was expired. Thirdly, this autopsy saying that he died of hypothermia is bullshit. The actual autopsy documents state quite clearly that there was no water in his lungs. He was dead before he hit the water. An autopsy account by the official surgeon involved has no record of poisoning or drowning, but records death by a single bullet fired into the head at close range. And hey, there we go, mystery solved, but let's keep going. Fourthly, it's quite possible Rasputin sitting up in the fire was the fire causing his tendons to constrict by shrinking, and the quote-unquote death threats they heard could have been steam escaping from his body, kinda like Attack on Titan. Fifthly, number 5, this letter predicting the royal family's death is not exactly a prediction. There's no specifics here, and it could also be a fake. The fucking autopsy was fake, so why not the letter? As far as his ability to heal the sick goes, there isn't really any evidence to support it, except maybe the story of Alexei. However, a good argument could be made that Rasputin just inadvertently helped him by not letting the doctors give him aspirin. Now, even though everything here seems to make sense and this case doesn't really seem like a mystery, it just seems like Captain Russia, Prince Feliks, wanted to save Russia and most likely kill his way to a more powerful position. Therefore, Rasputin had to die. Even though that's all pretty clear, there are still some very, very, very strange theories about Rasputin's murder. According to how stuff works, retired Scotland Yard detective Richard Cullen and historian Andrew Cook proposed a new theory behind Rasputin's death. In 2004, they claimed that his death stemmed from a British secret intelligence plot involving 2 officers, Oswald Rayner and John Scales. They based their conclusions on a connection between Prince Feliks and Oswald Rayner and information John Scales had recorded on Rasputin. Oh, how dastardly of them. It was also proposed in 2007 that a British conspiracy hatched by the Prime Minister David Lloyd George led to Rasputin's murder. Now, both of these theories are based on Russia's important role in World War I for Britain. With Russia fighting for Germany from the east, it provided an important buffer for the Allies since the Germans could not use all of their strength for combat in the west. However, nobody really gives a fuck, and neither of these theories have gained much acceptance. Well then, I think it's fair to suggest that the case of Grigori Rasputin, lover of the Russian queen, Russia's greatest love machine, and Russia's most notorious man, is solved. However, that was inevitable, because it was never really a mystery in the first place.
It's a lot of overblown nonsense, a lot of drug nuts running wild.